Hola, amigos. Welcome to the rules panel of Hollerween 2, where we get to grill the rules guru, the rules maven, the master of the master plan, Clint Black, on all things Savage Worlds rules. Well, welcome, Clint.
Thank you, Chris.
We've
I'm
got.
frightened to be here.
I know. Usually we leave this kind of chat to the forum where we can, pretend we don't see certain questions or, certain posts just go away into the black hole of anonymous. But
That does not happen.
that never happens. We don't.
Correct.
We don't do that. We do that. We don't. So yeah, if you guys have questions about the rules of Savage Rules, how they came about, favorite rules, favorite mechanics, all that stuff, this is the panel to get those answered. So I think to start us off, Clint, as I've
Okay.
given you all of 35 seconds while you also had to retweet that we were starting to think about this.
Right. Yeah.
Is
Bring it
there
on,
a
Landauer. Bring it on.
right? Is there a rule, sir? Hi, my name's Chris. I'm from Denver, Colorado. Nice to meet you. Is there a rule or mechanic that has gotten away that you've come up with that you thought was going to be great, but playtesting showed it wasn't, or you just haven't found the right setting or the right area for it? Like, is there a rule mechanic that your white whale rule or mechanic you loved it, haven't used it yet, or had to let it go? Is there?
Um, well, there was this thing I came up with this idea. I called them hit points, and I thought it would be big, but uh,
Should have trademarked it. Should have put it. Should have filed for it.
yeah, actually, I mean, it's something I tell people all the time. It's like the book you see is like the seventh iteration probably of something we already looked at by the time I get there. So sometimes it takes me a moment to kind of go through of where do we go? And you know, and all too often it's like, oh, we went back to, the first idea, or somewhere along the way we found something. But uh, yes. Um, but I don't know if there's anything that's kind of slip through the cracks so much. Um, I think I was when we did Suede, I was actually a big cheerleader for making the 4 wound cap rule the core rule, and making unlimited wounds kind of a setting rule to make more deadly settings, to make that the baseline. Um, so it's still there. It's just in as a setting rule, and I think that works out because it's easy for me. It's and this is kind of the determination we came from to is it's easy to say it doesn't matter what setting you're playing, literal setting, you can apply that rule for your table. Um, I think that might be one thing is it's actually a meta rule is that when I say setting rule, the general thought process is it's kind of the genre and what the world is that you're playing, and that is a big part of it. But for me, it's also setting literally your table. That is also a setting for the game. It's your table, so there should be setting rules. You can apply those just for how you want to run the game at your table because that's as much part of the setting in real life as the fictional setting, you know. And I get that might be one thing is that clarification for those kind of things that setting rules don't just apply to the genre you're playing, they can also apply to literally at your table. I mean, we just had the discussion of kids and gaming. You can have setting rules for playing with kids that you may not apply, when playing with adults that actually change how the game works.
Ooh, I like that. Like game specific, even session specific. Like you can ease some certain rules for like the big finale or whatever. I think that's really cool. Jody commented in it. She says, "Tales from the Black's Table. The 4 wound cap saved your butt when she was running for you recently." So
She is absolutely correct because Jody has no idea of encounter design.
Or she just has like fantasies about killing her husband.
That's also
way.
possibly true. I will also say that the boogeyman in Deadlands is a frightening opponent, literally very frightening.
Yeah. I found out that the Nosferatu are also like, you just don't want to. They are not. They're not. No, they're not breakfast cereal vampires. They're will...
not. It's not, Count Chocula. No, not at all. No. That's, it is a very viable tactic for Night Train to just get on your horse and run.
I think that's the only way people survive is adios muchachos. Although, yes, I played in a high-powered Night Train game where we were all legendary, and I had like a hickory stick that was like the magic stick that could basically do the one insta kill kind of was its special power, and I booked it right for the conductor and spent all my bennies and all my dice to kill the conductor, and that's the only way we survived. I'm like, no, there is no way a juke train car loads full of Mechanica and vampires are nope. I'm just gonna run for the conductor. It's the only way out. And then when I actually played with John Goff with a much lower character, we killed 4 or 5 because it was like
that Deadwood?
Yeah, the Deadwood table. The open.
Yeah, I got to play at his Deadwood game too, and it was funny to me because I was the only player who was ending with the same character they started with, because he was running Night Train as a meat grinder, scenario, and you just pick up another player and you another character and you start playing when the other character dies, and everybody was like, "Oh, that's because Clint knows the rules." I'm like, "No, it's because I know John. Stay the hell away from the foes." Oh my gosh!
Right? Yeah, we thought, be like, "Oh no, this character's in the prison. The prison bars will save us from." No, they don't.
No.
Oh no!
And I mean, my character didn't live. He just had a most glorious death at the end, where he actually climbed all the way up to the steeple and roped himself to the steeple's cross up on top, and but then someone dropped a lantern and set the church on fire. So ultimately, my character was just not going to make it. It was such a horror movie, but in all the best ways,
Oh, that is fantastic. So it looks like we've got our first rules question. Let's see, from Balas SM. In the fear table, you can roll Phobia minor/major. It requires a high roll on the table, which means it's a bad result. Does the character get the Phobia penalties in a fight against the monster?
If it's appropriate, yes. Now, the key being, like we say about the characters getting phobias, that it shouldn't necessarily be a fear of the monster, because that's only logical. Phobias are irrational fears. But generally, it is something based on the situation and the scenario. And if that's the current situation they're in, that could be it. I mean, it could be, one of the most vicious ones was fear of blood.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
When does that ever come up in role?
When does that ever come up? Yeah, but those penalties go into effect. I mean, it's why there's no distracted, vulnerable, shaken, or any other effect that stacks on top of phobia when you fail that fear check, because you're already going to get that, typically that -1 or -2. Now, the great thing is it's in the GM's call territory. So it is a way for the GM to say something like, you guys are in kind of a bad situation here, so I'm actually going to give you a phobia of actual ferrets or something like that when you're fighting the nose ferrets. It's like, these were just supposed to be some kind of big ferret, and maybe it's not applicable at that particular time.
So that was a comment from Jody letting people know we are crowdfunding Holler and Appalachian Apocalypse. In an hour from now, we'll have Tim and Tracy on to talk about the actual game. But we are so close to the lovely leatherette cover. So back, please. We're so close.
Yes, please, back. I mean, and this is a setting that is near and dear to my heart, please, because I am literally one generation removed from these people. They are, as they say, it's my kinfolk up in the hills.
Yeah, we had a comment on it. It was really funny. I mean, just as a slide divagation while we wait for more comments to roll in from the chat. But we had a comment on Reddit that was it was calling into question Tim's bona fides on the holler. And I was like, oh my God, you asked the wrong people the wrong questions, son, because Tim is born and bred, Jody's born and bred, Clint's born and bred, Shane's born and bred. I mean, there's deep connections back to this part of the country and these stories. And
I mean, literally, yeah, I'm right there. I mean, this is my grandparents up on that side and everything like that. But I'm not close to Tim. It's literally a professor of Appalachian studies. How much more do you want? Plus, he's been a poet laureate, a poet in residence. I mean, and yeah, no,
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like, yes, we've got the cred, folks. This is a legit endeavor, and that's the other thing too. I think on both sides of that coin, because we are trying to reach out and advertise in some places we haven't advertised before, because I think this is a very unique property. And so we got some drive-by comments of people who were, their first thought of Appalachia was a little more stereotypical and negative, and it's like, no, there are people who have teeth in this setting, guys. I mean, it's not. We're not punching down at Appalachia. This is inspired. This is empowering. The characters are heroes. The subject matter is weighty. I
mean, one of the big things about Holler that I really love is that it plays on that whole, this is the little guys being, I mean, it's one of the most classic in America stories of people being taken advantage of by essentially the ultra rich and powerful. I mean, Tennessee Ernie Ford's career wouldn't exist without 16 Tons, the song. And I sold, St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go. I sold my soul to the company store. This is the baseline and that's part of what those songs were. And I mean, it deals with part of that is like, a lot of people don't realize bluegrass was one of the original protest songs, that told the horrible stories they dealt with. And there's so much love in this from Tim about it. And then there's so many things that even I didn't know. I mean, he talks about Appalachian speech in it. And I know we're getting off from rules, but this is a little bit about getting into not just rules, but the book providing you, it's not exactly a rule, but it's information on how to play it. This is one thing I never realized until I read it in him is a lot of Appalachian speech uses a double negative. And Tim points out in the book that it's generally in a case where it's talking about like their kind of almost semi-nihilistic beliefs. It's when they don't have something. And he goes, I ain't never got one of them really good fresh apple pies that they make down there. You don't say, I necessarily, I ain't never been attacked by a bear. It's like, no, that's a good thing. The double negative is kind of bearing down on that how hard life is and things like that. And I was like, I did not realize that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, Shane points out we had someone ask, how can we be playtesting a book that isn't out yet? And sometimes you have to shrug your shoulders and move on. True enough.
Yeah. But
the part of the playtesting, this, the Holler has not gone through this process yet, and this is the so-called black edit. So tell us, Clint, what is the black edit, and why do all of us who have ever submitted something to Pinnacle and have Pinnacle publish it fear the black edit?
Yes. The black edit is a joke. I will admit that. It's just a joke, people. Don't take it so seriously. But it's, when the book reaches Clint, he is, going to contact the author. And the general of the joke is, I like it. I love it. I mean, this is brilliant. So starting with page 1, let's go into what needs to be changed. And, it really, I mean, it's the key part of, a key part of what my job is making sure all the books we put out sync up with the core rules. And to be clear, a lot of people think, oh, it's sync up with everything. And that's not always necessarily true, because while you can definitely use, like you could use critters out of Deadlands in Holler, obviously, things like that. It doesn't mean that everything has to sync up perfectly. There's always going to be some GM stuff, but it should sync with the core, of how it works there. And that's just, that's kind of what it comes in as. When people are writing stuff, they come up with ideas and things, and it gets put in there. And then, my job is to go in and make sure that's going to sync up and work well with the core, and it's going to build on it and make it better and fit the setting and do all that other stuff. So, no, because we are hardcore dealing with the superpowered companion right now. The Holler hasn't necessarily gone through the Black edit, but I have looked at it, and I'm, of course, like I said, I'm excited about it because, I just love the idea of, like you said, representing those people and what they've done, and some of that knowledge about them. I mean, people talk about, the way they speak is considered hickish and unintelligent, but in linguistics, if you go back and look, those people have just been separated from where language has changed outside to their speech patterns are more pre-Victorian style English speak languages. I mean, even now in Britain, ain't is used a lot. Ain't is, more British than isn't, in a way.
Oh, no, exactly. And there's some very interesting scholarship in that on just kind of how, when you export a language and then like the not just the accents, but the usage and the grammar, literally and oftentimes will capture what the exporter culture was, and it'll stay more preserved in the export. So it's very similarly to the sort of the Welsh and showing up in like Australia and New Zealand because of the expats there. And even like little things. I think Thomas Sowell had a great essay where he identified, things that we identify with like Black vernacular English now, like axe, right, for ASK, is actually goes right back to Irish and Scotch-Irish immigrants, and that being a way that word was pronounced in England at the time when. So we now think it's a change from that. It's like no, we've other languages move beyond, and these are still kind of preserved. So that's kind of the interesting thing about Holler too, is I think the Appalachian. Yeah, I'm the wrong.
We do. He does make a point of explaining the proper pronunciation. Appalachian, not Appalachian.
But the you're right, but on how much that is also not only just an incubator for American language, but American culture and American myth making and storytelling, and just how much of that is either from that region or preserved in that region. So here's,
we wouldn't have NASCAR if it wasn't for moonshiners. Yeah,
all of that. Yeah, all of those innovations and that that sort of ethic. And I mean, there's some fun. I mean, it's not in Holler, but it's definitely of the right time period about the races they used to have up and down the Mississippi with boats, and how NASCAR with cars, but there used to be these fantastical boat races with steam engines, and just how much part of the American Industrial Revolution was driven by what we today would call like racing culture, came out of not blowing up steam engines while trying to have races or running away from authorities up and down the rivers. And so there's fun stuff there. But getting back to rules. So going off of Shane's question about playtesting, how much does playtesting change what you come at rules by? Like, I kind of, my first question was like, did you have a rules that you loved and it didn't meet the, how much does actual playtesting inform your decisions on what makes it in rules, what rules need to change?
Playtesting is usually our litmus test for the final iteration of what we think the rule should be after we've gone through some different concepts and ideas. And a big part of that is, and Shane's great with this, is let's just throw everything out there. Don't worry if it sounds stupid or whatever. Let's just be creative for the moment, put stuff out there and see where we go, because maybe that'll spark the idea that is what we later on. And that's great doing that. But then you got to get down and go, okay, now that we've got this idea, let's look at it, measure it out. Now let's put it into play test and see what happens. I mean, the absolute best example of that was pre-Suede, when we began discussing the change to recovering from shaken. The way it used to work in Savage Worlds Deluxe, and it got changed during that printing. And the concept that we realized the rules had kind of mutated a little bit in that case, in how people played, and affected that in a way that wasn't expected because of the rule, which is essentially that GMs were giving out more bennies so players could buy off shaken because they were losing actions unless they got a raise on the roll, And we're like, well, what we had wanted, and we've said this in the rules before, is extras are up, down, or off the board. Well, what we had was added an extra step in there that we didn't realize, which was up, down, unable to act off the board. Can't act off the board. Not shaken, can't act, and then not shaken, still can't act for this one round. And it was only a one round situation kind of thing, but it made a difference. So it was like, what if we make this change? I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like such a huge change. This sounds good. It's like, but what if we do it? Let's do it to, make a recovery, and let's put it into playtesting and see how it works. And that was one of those cases of, okay, there were so many thought processes of this can't work. And then it went into playtesting, and it was like, oh my gosh, this works so well. This makes everything run faster. It doesn't really change the outcomes at all, because it's affecting everyone. And it's also, the GM, the players aren't having to spend bennies just to act, as opposed to spend bennies to do cool things, or to survive, horrible things, So that was, going into playtesting, and that just reinforced, what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We get stuff that goes into playtesting, and it's like, nope, that's not going to happen, and we're never going to talk about this again.
Not even to give me good content on a stream in the future, 2 years later.
Nope.
I do agree, especially on that change. There was a small vocal minority who were just against that one rule change. And it's like, well, guys, you can always keep the old rule. And I don't hear that dialogue anymore.
No,
I mean,
no.
I think when you actually see it played.
I think the part to me, and I don't, it's one of those things of, I mean, we've kind of said it to some extent with every book we put out, is give it a chance to play it first.
Yeah.
I mean, you read it, yes, you may see something, but get it a chance to play all of it and how it works together, because that's important. And there were people that hadn't played it yet and had some things. And I think the funniest to me was in a thread talking about it, to where on one page I had, as I recall, a person saying it makes the bad guys too powerful. And then on the next page, it makes the player characters too powerful. It's like, well, which one is it here? It's like, and I said, the point of it is it just makes it run faster, because, odds wise, actually running the numbers and everything like that, it's pretty much the same as it was.
Yeah, Shane says, and it works great with distracted.
Yeah, and that was actually a lead into some of the things that happened with Suede, and with distracted. Yeah, like it allowed us to do some of that. That's those things of you get somebody distracted, and boy, you have seriously changed their chance to recover from shaken and down for a while, and it was thoughts like that led into some things that changed in in Suede, where we came up with the thought of, in general, when you're rolling an attribute, it's to resist something. And if you're rolling a skill, it's to do an action. And when you're doing actions, raises are more important. When you're acting, the character is acting, as opposed to when they're reacting with an attribute, in which case, let's just succeed and keep going, because it's a reaction generally, you know? And that just, you know, it was one of those things of, will this work? Yeah, it will. Let's keep going. And as with anything, there are a few exceptions out there that we've got, but that's one of the things you think, you know, it said is we can have a rule that sits there, but if it's just consistency for the sake of consistency, that's not worthwhile. If there's an exception and it makes sense, we'll put it in as an exception. That one's going to work this way, you know?
John Dooms made a great comment about the speed is really what makes Suede fantastic. Is there a highest design goal when you're looking at rules? Or is it kind of the blend of experience and play? I mean, you know, how does it all come together? You know, what are your design principles around rules?
There is a number one design goal: fun. It's got to be fun. It can't be purely simulationist. It can't be, you know, it's got to still be fun. You know, if it can do all the other things, that's great, you know. But if it's a case where, you know, this just isn't a fun rule to play, or it doesn't, and by fun, that doesn't just mean, oh, it's always exciting. You know, it can also mean it builds drama. You know, it builds, you know, on the tension, or it can do that. I mean, there's a variety of ways. Fun is rather overarching, but, you know, I mean, it's been on the book and it's been the tagline. It's got to be fast, furious, and most importantly, fun, you know, is what we want. So that's always kind of at the back of our minds. And sometimes it is a case of, okay, let's take a step back. Will this actually be fun? And there's, you know, and then it goes into the other ones, you know, will it be very angry? Furious.
Right. And then John Doom says we have to keep it fun to avoid Donald's ludonarrative dissonance, just to be able to make me say ludonarrative dissonance. And
right.
So here's one thing I'm pleasantly surprised at from getting to see behind the curtain more over the last several months is I'm trying to phrase this the right way, because there's
good luck.
Right? Yeah. Don't get fired in this phrasing. I just love. I invented some new words that started with luck in another stream, and I'm like, wow, that was so close to saying something I shouldn't have said on stream, but I didn't. Still PG-13.
Yes.
But is how, like, watching design meetings with you and Shane when you guys butt heads on stuff. I love it. I love seeing how that works and how, like, what comes out of it is so much more better and interesting than what goes in. And I don't think it's obvious on the way in. Like so how much is conflict's the wrong word, but
it's opposition kind of in a way that, you know, what we're going to. And yeah, I mean, we're both headed to this. The great part about it is neither of us is really caught up in ego about this. And that's one of the reasons this has worked for so long, so well. We both know, for both of us, the goal is a better game and for it to be more fun. But we also both have different viewpoints on things, which is great because, yeah, it does lead to, you know, thinking of things. Yeah, he thinks of things I never would have. I think of things he never would have. And then I just have to convince him I'm right. That's all, you know. But no, I mean, we do that. I mean, where we disagree and, you know, come around. And the best part for me is when we disagree and we have two completely separate ideas and we sit there and we talk about it, and the end result is a third completely different thing that's better than either one of us had, you know. And that's phenomenal. And that's part of what's great about working with him, because that happens so often, because again, it's not personal. We're always going to be friends above everything else, you know. If that ever became an issue, yeah, that's okay. That's not going to be it. But it is a case of, trusting each other that, we're going to do this stuff and we're going to go into it. And also, uh, it's his experience that he has in doing what he's done. And then it's also his trust in me that there are ways the rules, kind of going back to making settings work with the core rules, intertwine and work, that for whatever reason my brain tends to catch those things. Not always, but sometimes. I do a pretty good job on that, and realizing, it's like, yeah, this is a great idea, but in combination with this core rule we have over here, this in this situation, this would cause this issue. And it's like, okay, well, that's it. But in general, there are definitely times when we have opposing opinions and things like that. And I think the best part of that is the fact of, it's like, it comes down to, I want to be sure that this is something we're both going to be happy with moving forward when we do that. And, that's what our goal is. And it is the thing that we both have that same goal of, a fun game. It's just my version of fun is better.
I have better fun than you do.
Yes.
No, you just mentioned was exactly one of the scenarios that I was impressed when I saw, was just how when one of you threw out an idea that, like, it sounded just crystal perfect when I heard it. I was like, oh, that's brilliant. That's great. And then, the other one said, but what about this situation? And then it was like, oh, instantaneous. Oh, cracking that glass. I mean, yeah. It would put that, and like, see how, by being a nascent, setting developer and doing some of the things myself, and then, like, going over what the other kind of aces are doing in the swag program, I do see how there's a certain amount of ego that comes with setting design and rules design, where it sounded so good in your head, you have to keep it there. And maybe this is kind of what people mean by you have to kill your darlings. There are certain things that they don't meet, when they actually hit reality, they're not going to work right. And I think those are some of the newbie mistakes that I've made, and I've seen other people make, where it sounded so perfect. It was the mechanic really was, whatever. And then you're like, wait a minute, did it actually meet the goal of being more fun at the table? And if it doesn't, that's the ultimate sign of success.
Yeah, that's a hard thing for me to do when I am working with designers and things like that. And it's tough because I see what they put into it. And what I'm talking about is a situation where you see these rules that they've put out there, and to make something work the way they see it. And I come back with, but how is that different from just applying this core rule that already exists? Mm-hmm. And, it's kind of like a balloon.
But I thought I invented something beautiful. It's like, oh,
yeah,
no.
Yeah, and it's like, it just, but the thing is, it's not taking away from what they've created. It's saying, hey, here's how we integrate that to make it better with what we have. And because we're saying it works like this, well, guess what? Now we have some room to add some other stuff to build on that, this thing that you've kind of made, to make it even better off the core rules. Like, we can take that. I mean, we did that some with Deadlands, where, we can make this work better this way, which means we can, add more stuff, or it's easier to think. It's like metal mages in the companion. Once we hit on the idea that metal mages are really just dealing with the devil because they know what they're doing, then it's like, well, we've already got that. It's essentially them, and that goes back to what they were. They were kind of a mix of mad scientists and hucksters. Well, this is how they do it. They're basically tapping into that kind of stuff. Spoiler alert, everybody that's had their head in the sand with, Deadlands for 25 years, on how that happens. But, but it was like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. And it was easy enough to say, hey, here's how they, how that works for them. if instead of gambling, you could actually offer up an ounce of ghost rock, to, be a little better at what you're doing and stuff like that. And that was, it's like, we've already got the rule in another book, we'll show how it works and then mix it in here. And, again,
I think that's one thing that is different about role-playing games is that you might be the chef of the setting, right? Like you might be the creator, the artist. That's you're doing that aspect, but you're not running a restaurant. You're not feeding people yourself. You are putting down a recipe that other people at their tables have to create, right? So that distance between what sounds great in your head and what needs to be on the paper as the rules, so that people that you're never going to meet are never going to be able to ask you a question. I mean, obviously we're connected in the modern world, but in essence, the rules you put out and the core rulebook you put out are going to be manifested by other people. And so there is that level of care you have to take where you kind of have to check your assumptions, right? You have to be like the things that you just assume are how people play and are always going to be how people play. Well, no, it's got to be clear.
That is absolutely probably the number one thing that I guess I would try to warn any game designer about, and just warn, because it is so easy and common to presume that how you're playing at your table is how everyone plays, because that's your experience. That's what's happening. That's what's going. And you can't presume that, and any presumptions whatsoever of it. The tripping point that I've seen come up so often is, okay, we played the stuff, and it's like, well, if I go back and I say, I don't understand how this rule could work. And it's like, well, I mean, it works in our game. It's like, how exactly does this work in your game? Just explain to me how it kind of happened. Like, give me an example from playtesting or something like that. And in the course of that, they will explain some kind of rule or effect that they use at their table that's not written down, and it's like, this is where, you have to tell people this, or you have to account for that. And it's tricky because you just do it unconsciously, and that's, so it is. It's just how we play our games. It's like, one thing that we used to use, like, was a personal rule at our games was, we have 2 deck of cards for initiative. If you were, if the Joker came up, the GM would just hand the cards with a Benny to whoever was lowest on Bennies and have them shuffle while he went to the next deck. It's great. Kept things moving, kept Bennies out there and things like that.
Shane hates it, I think.
Probably. But
giving people Bennies to do work now.
Give people Bennies to keep the game flowing. Are you mad? No. But the one thing about it is you have to, even if it's a small thing, you have to take into account that's essentially an extra Benny going out every time a Joker comes up, which now with Suede, I don't really use it as much, because when a Joker comes up, all the players are getting a Benny anyway,
Well,
so
I think
tricky.
Before we get to John Doom's question, I think that goes back into the very first question you answered about the shaken rule change. Is the game the way the game got played had evolved, and I think that the part of that evolution was the Benny economy evolved, right? And
exactly.
So that of course, with more Bennies and more Benny economy and more reasons to use and give out Bennies, that it made that spending the Benny to get your action back a no-brainer. So again, if that option is never not being executed, then it's not really a rule, right? Like, it's not really a rule that's coming into play. So let's figure out a way to make this rule, consistent and useful, and in correctly accounting for the inflation of the Benny economy.
Right. And there was a disparity because we've got it now in the system, but at that time there really wasn't any way for the GM to get more Bennies. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of ways now, but there was no way. So since Bennies, recovering from Shaken was dependent on having Bennies, and the GM had fewer Bennies and more characters to deal with, it was a disparity there. And it was also a case of, even if they were giving out Bennies kind of like it was originally suggested, you would have players that weren't getting actions or
Mhm.
decided not to buy up their spirit, for whatever, because it made sense for the character. They just didn't think about how important that would be or whatever, and spend a few rounds with nothing to do, But
I know. I think new characters or new players, Savage Worlds, might look at Spirit as a dumb stat. It's like, oh wait, the skills aren't really connected to it. There's all these skills into these other ones. So if I need to buy skills too, oh no, if you want to survive, Spirit and Vigor are where you go, folks. Spirit and Vigor. So John Doom asks, what is the most common misstep of nascent designers trying to shoehorn their setting into your system?
So this isn't exactly like that, but I would say the most common misstep is if they had it planned for another system, trying to stick with mechanics from that system as opposed to kind of the core concept of convert the idea, not the mechanics. Jody says feats do not equal edges. That is correct. But that tends to be, part of it. Another, I think converting the setting is, I guess it would be the kind of the reinventing the wheel aspect to a certain extent of, it's like, well, we have this very particular character type in here. Like there's a group of elves who live in this forest and, they have an entire regiment of elves who are sharpshooters, who work from the treetops or whatever. Well, so, I want to give them their own edge to relate to that. Well, between marksman and assassin, what are you looking for here? What makes them stand out from that other than, okay, these are fairly elite the way you're describing them, so they could have a few edges. Do you need to give them an edge for that? It's like, well, they can move through the trees with ease. Free runner, rename it, and just say that's what it is. It's sometimes doing the reinventing the wheel as opposed to how can I adapt what already exists and it'll work seamlessly what I've already got in mind.
Do you think there's a push there? So I'll say this. I think there might be a tendency for people to over-design versus under-design, right? Like add more mechanics to mechanicify things that don't need to be, that can just be narrative. But I think that might also come from like there's a certain excited part of the community that looks at settings for what new edges and hindrances and mechanics are going to come from there. And so I think there might be a push to add more than you need to. Because I mean, to me, a lot of settings could just simply be about the fluff, right? About what kind of stories you're telling, what kind of background information you're giving, and what kind of adventures you're writing. And they don't need a lot of custom mechanics to go with it. But there's this kind of what's a new edge? I mean, Savage Worlds is really kind of comprehensive, right? Like if you've got a nice set of mechanics, there's only so many ways you can change those. Right? So only so many bonuses or penalties you can give, and for the most part, you and Shane have come up with edges and hindrances that give you those bonuses or negatives. So I think what you said, like maybe just rename something and to give it a little flavor so it sounds more to your setting versus do you really need a new mechanic? Shane chimes in, too many specific edges that people would never take. I mean, that's the thing, right?
That's definitely, I mean, I will not say what I looked at, but just recently, not too long ago, looking at a product, and it's like the new edge that's in there did exactly the same thing as an existing edge in Suede, but was more restrictive. So, in other words, it only did it where this edge always applies every time you make a trait roll for this, using this trait. This only applies in specific situations and does the same thing. Well, that's not really, really helpful. I'm like, I don't disagree that you couldn't make an edge off of that because that is important to the setting, but consider, how it's going to be as how somebody is going to sit there and look of, well, do I take this edge or do I take that edge? Or also putting it out there of, I want to be a character that's really good at this. I take both of them and they work well together. The sum of them is better than the individual parts, although both are fairly equivalent. And that's you get into those very, like you said, some very specific edges that people won't take. And I'll tell you, I think we've put a few of those out there in the day. Not saying, not that I wrote them, but no, I mean, it happens. I mean, sometimes, you think and it works. And, I had to put this this way, but sometimes it's a case of, I would say you really want to try to avoid that if at all possible. But if you really want an edge in there that does something kind of specific in a particular way or whatever, go ahead and put it in. Put in your, your darling edge, but just don't make it a book of darlings. Kill most of your darlings, but sure, you can keep one to make yourself happy.
Right, and I think that is true when people don't realize that it's kind of the difference in my head between GURPS and Savage Worlds is that GURPS decided to add all of those new variants, and so then you had to have a very specifically pointed point buy system where this advantage would cost you 20, and then this one would cost you 25, and this one would cost you 27 and 15 cents. Whereas, Savage Worlds didn't go that direction. It went, all edges cost the same. All hindrances give you the same amount of points back to buy other things. So not all edges specifically have to be perfectly as powerful, but in that vein, the way that you can kind of, make them, you have to have like the right tree to get to the edge. But, I like that better. I mean, in essence, like, yes, doing an infinite point buy system for balance can give you more options. But, I don't know that since we're not, we're actually just the ultimate thing we're doing is telling stories to each other, and that the rules are there to keep it balanced and fair and predictable in a sense and fun. The rules are a safety tool. Like, they're about agreement and how things progress, going in. And they're not a scientific experiment where if you get one a little bit wrong, it could blow up in your face or just not work. I think that the level of granularity Savage Worlds has, I think, is fantastic. And so someone's about to ring my doorbell. So we got another panel coming up here in about 10 minutes. So last question, Clint. What's your favorite rule?
Ooh. The one you haven't seen.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
No, one that hasn't come out yet. I will tell you, you never stop designing. You never stop doing this stuff. I will say, Jody and I were out last night driving home, and we're actually playing a co-GM duet game. And we had a conversation about setting rules specifically for duet games, like how to adjust rules, because of, our part of our base concept is, you've got maybe 3 to 5 players, could be more, could be, whatever. But, playing a duet game has different things. So, my favorite rules are the ones I think I'm working on at the time. And, when they get into play, that's great and everything. But then it's like, okay, what else what new thing can I do to make this even more fun and better? So, yeah, it's kind of going to always be that one you haven't seen yet, the one that's percolating in my mind and moving to the next thing.
That's the perfect way to end it. So, guys, coming up in 10 minutes, we got a panel on Holler with Tracy and Tim. And until next time, in 10 minutes, we'll see you guys again. But thank you, Clint, for joining us on the rules panel.
And for everybody watching, you all get a Benny. That's an official rule.
Nice. So yes, and then the again, back our Kickstarter. We are so close to the next stretch goal, which is that lovely leatherette cover. So if you haven't checked out the Kickstarter, Jody put a link in the chat. Go check that out now before the next panel gets started here at the top of the hour. So we'll see you in a few minutes, folks.
All right. Bye, everybody.